Senator John McCain of Arizona, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, has died at the age of 81 after losing his battle with brain cancer. There is a good number of things to say on this subject, on McCain's legacy, on the things he did, the things he achieved, good and bad, or rather successes and failures. When it comes to politics, I think that too many people put things from the perspective, too many things from the perspective of morally good, morally bad, when so much of politics has to deal, or political discussion at least has to deal with domestic policies. At least that's what people mostly care about. And when it comes down to that, there's a lot of things that are really subjective. So I will not look at McCain's legacy from a partisan point of view. For the record, I think that he did some things that I approve of. There are things that I strongly disapprove of. That's where I stand on this issue. But let's look at this through as neutral, objective, non-partisan way of doing so. McCain was a defense and foreign policy hawk and a domestic maverick. On defense spending, he was absolutely right. As long as America is involved in as many regions of the world as it is, in as many conflicts around the world as it is, it makes sense to properly fund the U.S. military and other such services, the intelligence agency and so on. It makes sense. Now, don't tell this to some people who believe that defense spending is evil and wrong. I personally take the view that as long as your country is involved, as the U.S. is, you need to properly fund your military. The U.S. military needs about $800 billion. It's not quite there yet, but it is going to increase year by year. With Trump in office, even after Trump's in office, because only Obama was really opposed to it. And when it comes to defense spending, John McCain played a significant role in that, to the point that the Senate named it the current NDA, the National Defense Authorization Act, after him. Trump didn't mention this, of course, when he signed the bill, and it would have killed him to actually do so. But McCain did play a significant role. Even while he was dying in Arizona, even in his final days, he played a significant role in crafting the current NDAA via his staff. So that is certainly one of his legacies. To give you a particular point, a particular success story, the U.S. Air Force foolishly wanted to retire the A-10 Warthog, one of the cheapest planes that America flies, and one that they will continue to fly given their involvement around the world in terror, and against guerrilla groups that the U.S. is fighting around the world. So they'll continue using the A-10 Thunderbolt, A-10 Warthog, and yet the U.S. Air Force wanted to get rid of it. It was people like John McCain that prevented that from happening and who pushed sensible defense spending policies across the board. So for that, he should be recognized and he should be applauded. The problem, though, with McCain and the U.S. military is not how he wanted it funded, on what federal government money should be spent on when it came to the military, but how to use it. He was very similar to Madeleine Albright in one respect. What's the point of having such a powerful military if you can't use it? McCain strongly advocated since the late 90s, starting with the Kosovo campaign, strongly advocated in favor of military intervention abroad. And regardless of your political ideology, regardless of your political viewpoints, be it if you're a foreign policy interventionist who believes in the spreading of democracy, or you're someone like me who's a realist who believes that war is a legitimate instrument of the state, a continuation of politics, as Clausewitz said, but one that should be used intelligently, or you're a foreign policy dove, or you're a anti-war person at heart, regardless of where one stands on the issue of war, where one stands on the issue of foreign policy interventionism, McCain's policies were absolutely idiotic. There are 3 major wars that he was personally advocating for over the last 20 years, and every single one of those has ended up being an unmitigated disaster. Mind you, he is not the one solely responsible for that. The Bush administration, the Barack Obama administration are also responsible for that, which is why I imagine even far left-wing media outlets are not criticizing him for that, because it would mean also criticizing their dear leader, Barack Obama. But I started politics by following the Libya conflict, and it was a disaster. So are other conflicts that McCain advocated for fiercely, criticized his political opponents who were against those conflicts, and they all ended up as being disasters, one after another. We have the worst refugee crisis since World War II. We have hundreds of thousands of people dead, tens of millions of people that have suffered greatly as a result of the conflicts that he personally advocated for. This is not on a partisan level. This on a purely objective level. What John McCain advocated for, what he got, was absolutely idiotic. Even if one just wants to view these things from the position of an American and America's interests, these actions did not advance America's interests. They weakened America by weakening America's military, by creating plenty of chaos and a political instability in America's allies in Europe. So these wars, these interventions have been a disaster. In a lot of these cases, and when we're talking about the ones that Obama was responsible for, he wanted Obama to go further, much further. So that's on foreign policy, John McCain was an absolute disaster. His advocacy for human rights and his larger-than-life presence does not mask this, does not justify this. In fact, I'm fairly certain when it comes to the way the media is reacting and the elites are reacting, it's because John McCain was conscious about the media and the elites, and he personally cultivated a very good relationship with the elites. Not just in Washington, D.C., but around the world. That's why they're so fond of him. Now, I can't really comment about his personality. Maybe he was really that great of a guy in person, but his foreign policy was completely ridiculous, insane, and ultimately very damaging, not just to America, but to America's allies. Thousands of American soldiers lost their lives, American civilians, and I could go on. There are, however, important things to note about John McCain beyond defense and foreign policy, though these were the two main areas that he focused on. On domestic policy, he was a maverick. He was someone willing to buck the party trend, someone willing to negotiate with the other side in good faith, so much so that they even offered him a position as a Democrat in the Senate following the 2000 election, when the Senate was closely split between Republicans and Democrats. So the Democrats offered him that opportunity back then. He refused it, but he was someone really able to work together with the other side, which is something that's becoming increasingly rare in this day and age. And you do need people like John McCain in order to actually get things done. You can't just get things done on a purely partisan level, notwithstanding the fact that each political party in America is made up of various parts of people of different political ideologies. It's not just the Tea Party versus the progressive socialists in Congress. There's plenty of centrists, there's plenty of people of different political ideologies, and those people make up each of the political parties that are right now in Congress. McCain leaned more towards the moderate side. I think he was like 50 to 60% conservative, over 40% liberal on many of the positions that he took on various things. He was closer to the center than many other people in his party, and crucially, he was willing to negotiate with the other side in good faith. I mean, he was one of the people that helped solve the debt ceiling crisis, the government funding crisis that Obama had to deal with following the Tea Party takeover of the House of Representatives and the Republican obstructionism. I think one of the most important, and that's certainly one important thing that he did do, because he kept the U.S. government running. And I think that's going to become a problem in the future as you have fewer people like John McCain. One of his most important achievements was the McCain-Feingold bill, campaign finance reform. When people talk about Citizens United, it's important to understand that Citizens United more or less destroyed the McCain-Feingold Act. And it wouldn't have passed without John McCain. It was his piece of legislation, his crowning achievement when it came to domestic legislation. It passed with 60 votes in the Senate. It passed through a discharge petition in the House, which means you overcome resistance from the Speaker by forcing a discharge petition, because the Speaker can block votes. And it was signed by George Bush, who was enthusiastic about the whole thing, to say the least. Now, you can argue about the issue of the First Amendment, freedom of speech, but you can also look at the situation and say, yes, the rich are getting more and more powerful, able to dominate our lives, control our lives. Do you really want to give them more powerful? That's the core of the issue behind Citizens United. And while we, the regular people, suffer more and more when our freedom of speech is being infringed by the big corporations. And that's also something that is happening right now around the world. And beyond that, I would say one of the most important things he did was his involvement in the Gang of 14. A group of 14 senators that acted to save the Senate filibuster when Republicans threatened to nuke it in the early 2000s after facing obstructionism with regards to George Bush's judicial appointees. So they made a deal. 14 senators from both political parties made a deal to save the Senate filibuster, and they did so for close to a decade until Harry Reid eventually nuked it. And I do feel that is a fairly significant achievement, because America only has to suffer if it's just one side pushing whatever it wants when it's in power, because the other side is going to do the same thing once they get in power. The death of the Senate filibuster, if you're someone who opposes Trump, allowed people like Betsy DeVos or Neil Gorsuch, eventually when McConnell used what Harry Reid did and just took it one step further in order to confirm Neil Gorsuch. So it's certainly a problem, the increasing partisanship, tribalism that you're seeing right now in Washington, D.C., in America. And McCain was someone that was willing to take a stand against that. He was widely hated by large segments of the Republican Party because of that. I mean, he certainly hasn't won himself any favors, any fans, because he sunk the Obamacare repeal attempt. Though, I'll be fair to McCain on that issue, that just was a complete shit show. Because what they were voting on wasn't even a repeal of Obamacare. It was an attempt to force both the House and the Senate to conference where they could actually negotiate and ultimately get a final bill. Anyway, I'd say that about sums it up. McCain is someone that had a significant voice on various affairs in America. He was someone that was well known within and outside of America, someone that will be remembered. I do, however, feel that there are plenty of people who are going to view his legacy or in a wrong way or whitewash his legacy in order to make it seem more favorable than it actually is. He did do things that were very important, very positive. And I'm not talking here about things from a partisan point of view or one party cares about. I'm talking here the things that objectively do matter. Having the Senate as a functional institution does matter, regardless of what political side you're on. But similarly, not getting America involved in stupid, moronic wars for the spread of democracy also matters as well. And he was a very strong voice, very firm voice that continuously pushed for foreign policy interventionism. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video. Thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for more. And if you do like my content, please do consider supporting me via PayPal and Patreon so I can continue making political videos.